Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and it is finally time. We are talking about my favorite books of 2025. So I read a lot of really, really good books in 2025. I read 130 books, and I would say I really enjoyed the vast majority of them. So picking only 10 was very difficult, but after a lot of agonizing, several weeks of agonizing, in fact, I have picked my top 10 books of 2025. So these are in no particular order until the last 3 books, which will be my top 3 of last year. So I'm going to start off with one that feels a little bit like cheating because this book actually didn't come out last year. It comes out this year in March. It's not even out yet as of the making of this video, and that is Wolfworm by T. Kingfisher. 2025 wasn't the year that I first read T. Kingfisher. I've been reading her for a while, but with her huge number of new releases and re-releases of her older titles in 2025, she was easily my most read author of the year. I didn't look up the exact number, but I believe I must have read between 11 and 15 of her books. There's only one other book of hers on this list as a little bit of a spoiler, so it was very difficult to choose my favorites, but Wolfworm was really fantastic, and one of the reasons that I loved it so much is because it's a return to horror and it is Southern Gothic, which I absolutely love. So this book is set in 1899 in North Carolina, and we follow a young woman named Sonia. And Sonia was the daughter of a naturalist, and she took on the role of illustrating his work. Now, when her father dies, Sonia is left without many prospects, and she manages to snag a job illustrating the work of a man who studies insects for his published work in his home in North Carolina. Sonia arrives and she realizes that things are not necessarily what she had hoped for. He is a very, very cranky, not very friendly man, and things are a little bit strange around this manor. There is a missing wife, there is a mysterious predecessor who did beautiful illustrations that she feels she can't possibly hope to replicate, and there's also rumors about blood thieves in the woods. Now, I absolutely adore T. Kingfisher's style of writing. I always say that the things that I love most about her books are the fact that she includes older characters in her books. Her books are incredibly funny, while also remaining quite tense, especially her horror books. There's some really, really messed up stuff in this book, and it will absolutely give you some new phobias. I absolutely devoured this. I sunk into it. I loved it. I loved the characters. I loved the setting. And I always love her return to horror because I think that her fantasy books are incredible, but I do believe that her horror books are vastly underrated. So this was an easy choice for my top 10. This is out in March from Titan Books, so just saying. One of the reasons that I don't pick my favorite books of the year until the year is over is because of books like this. At the very, very end of December, I read Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, and I absolutely adored it. Now, Pet is a children's book. I believe it's technically a YA book, but it's one of those books that I believe really transcends its intended age range. I think that anyone can read this and really, really adore it. I think that anyone could get some really, really good lessons out of this. It's a little bit of a hard one to describe because there's a lot of metaphor and things going on here, but basically this book is about a young girl named Jam who lives in a city called Lucille. Now, Lucille used to be overrun by monsters who would do terrible things to people, or be oppressive, take away rights. It's sounding somewhat familiar. And one day the angels came and they banished the monsters, and now Lucille is a place without any monsters. People are very happy and at peace. Jam's mother, Bitter, is a painter, and she paints a creature on this huge canvas on the floor of her studio, and Jam accidentally pulls this monstrous creature out of the painting, and it says that it has a mission. It is hunting a monster in an unlikely place. This book is fantastic for a lot of reasons. I think that it's one of those that will definitely reach children and adults in very different ways. I feel like this is something that could probably be quite digestible for younger kids, teens, young adults, but also people who are on the older side like myself can definitely get a lot out of this book. I really love the way that they talk about justice in this book, and I also really love the way that they talk about sort of childhood and family dynamics and being listened to or being protected versus doing what you feel you need to do. I just think that this is an absolutely wonderful book. It takes a little bit to kind of get going, but the story was so absolutely incredible. It is powerful, it is deeply readable, and I absolutely loved it so much. And I also really loved Bitter, but this one it did take the spot as one of my top 10 books of the year. Next is a fairy tale of a novella that definitely packs a punch. This is The River Has Roots by Amal El-Motar. Now, you may recognize that name as one of the co-authors of This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is a fantastic book, a really wonderful book, and I believe this is her first published work after This Is How You Lose the Time War. I could be mistaken about that, but this is a solo work. It is a fairy tale, and it is gorgeous. So this book takes place in a town called Thistleford, and we follow the Hawthorne family, who have an ancient compact with the Fae to take care of the willow trees on their property and sing their thanks to them for the magic that they provide. The children of the Hawthorne family are two sisters. We have Esther and Isabel, and they have a wonderful, deep relationship. But Esther one day rejects a suitor in favor of a lover from the land of Fae, and terrible things happen. And this book is all about the love between sisters, the bond between them, and how far you will go to save your sister. As someone with a sister who I absolutely love and adore, I completely fell in love with this book. It is beautiful. It has a lot of the kind of style of like old English fairy tales, but it felt so incredibly fresh and new. It's beautiful, it's lyrical, it's lovely. I absolutely adore her writing, and this just like swept me away. It was a stunning read. I cannot recommend this more highly. It's a really little book, and it is absolutely beautiful inside and out. Now, I believe the author narrates the audiobook herself, and her real life sister does the music for it, because of course music is very important to the story, which like I love. But I gotta give a quick shout out to the physical copy of this book, because we have this beautiful cover, of course, but it is also highly illustrated throughout. So even though it is a small book, novellas do tend to be a little bit on the pricier side, I cannot recommend picking up a physical copy of this book for yourself, because it's just absolutely gorgeous. I just absolutely love this. I was floating around with little hearts in my eyes for about a week after I finished this. Turning from fairy tales to some slightly darker stuff, one of the best books that I read this year was an audiobook, and that was The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. Now, Stephen Graham Jones is an author that I don't always get on with. I have read one other of his books, and that was The Only Good Indians, and I love the first half of that. I didn't love the second half. There's a big like shift that happens. But I absolutely adored this, and I'm definitely going to be reading more of his stuff based on how much I love this, and I think I'm going to be going with the audio route for a lot of his books. So this book is split into two timelines. In the modern day, we have Etsy, who is a academic who desperately needs tenure. She needs to be published, and there has been an amazing discovery. It is her grandfather's journal from 1912, when he was a pastor in a town in Montana as it was becoming a state. So she is reading this journal, and she is planning her research to publish, and the other half, of course, is the journal. This is an unflinching horror story about colonial America and the incredible violence that the native population faced at the hands of colonization. And it is just absolutely incredible. And the audiobook narration for this was astonishing. I don't really want to say a huge amount about what happens in this book, because for me, part of the enjoyment and the experience was sinking myself into the audio and immersing myself in this story. It was one of those books that I kind of wished would never end, and it was fantastic. I cannot recommend this more highly. It's just a phenomenal book, and I really want to go out and read more of his stuff now. Now, speaking of horror books about the terrible things that people do to each other, I have seen Bat Eater by Kylie Lee Baker on so many people's best books of 2025 lists. In this book, we follow a young Chinese woman named Cora who is living in New York City, and this takes place right at the beginning of the pandemic. Cora is a witness to one of the most horrific crimes you can possibly imagine. Her sister is pushed in front of a subway train and killed in a racially motivated attack. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, Cora has some trauma associated with this, and one of the few things that she can manage to do is she gets a job as a crime scene cleaner. Cora is really struggling with her life. She can't really talk to anyone about it. She can't talk to her family or her weird coworkers, and there is a strange shadow that is following her. There is a series of unexplained serial killings in New York targeting specifically East Asian women, and Cora thinks that something or someone might be after her. One of the things that I love most in horror are books where people are the ones who are creating the horror. So yes, there is this big supernatural bad thing that is happening, but some of the most horrific stuff that happens is what we do to each other, and Bat Eater is a fantastic example of a book that blends both of those things. The supernatural elements in this book were really quite frightening, and the author does an amazing job of blending Cora's culture with these kinds of horror elements and creating something that's really fucking scary. But of course, what really stands out to me looking back on this book many months after having read it is, again, what people, humans, are doing to Cora, how people are being treated, the racism and the inequality and the prejudice that she faces. It's just, she does such an incredible job writing this, and you can tell that this book came from a place of anger and from rage. It's definitely proper spooky, but I would highly recommend this book to anyone, even if you are not necessarily a horror fan. The kind of social commentary that she brings into her horror in this book is just absolutely phenomenal. One of the first books that I finished in 2025 filled in a serious gap in my reading, and that was Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This book was published in 1993, and you would be astonished by how incredibly forward-thinking Octavia E. Butler was. I joke when I talk about the second book, which I haven't quite finished yet because it's a hard read, but I say that it's like she either is a time traveler or she was just an incredibly insightful woman who saw the way that society was going and made some predictions that feel quite accurate. I imagine you've probably heard the title Parable of the Sower before, but if you are unaware of what the book is actually about, it is set in a dystopian America in which only the rich and powerful are protected, and we follow a young woman named Lauren who is essentially living on a compound with her family. They're all scraping out an existence, but they have a great community. However, one night the compound is attacked and everything changes, and this book is truly phenomenal. I can understand why it is such an incredible classic. It's just so incredibly emotional and hard-hitting and relevant, and it just like grabs you by the throat and it doesn't let go. A lot of this book is focused around Lauren and her ideas for a new religion, and as someone who generally doesn't love religion being in my books, I really, really liked the inclusion of that. It's a way for her to kind of explore the world that she sees herself in and finding ways to make the world a better place. I absolutely adored this book, even though it is a hard read, especially right now. I cannot recommend picking it up even more because now is just the most perfect time to read it. I say that having only read 34% of the second book because that one gets even more relevant in some frightening ways. But it is one of my sort of 26 for 26 books. It's one of the books that I'm going to be reading this year. So I'm very excited to finish up this duology because this book was like a game changer. And now for something a little bit more lighthearted. I am not a romantasy girly. I'm not huge into like books that really focus very strongly on romance these days. I used to be, but not so much anymore. But let me tell you, I was kicking my little feet and like giggling with delight the entire time that I listened to Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. This is a fantasy horror romance book, and I cannot tell you how badly I needed this in my life. In this book, we follow Shisheshin, who is a shape-shifting creature who usually resides in a swamp as an amorphous blob. They generally tend to mind their own business until impolite monster hunters come in and try to kill them, and then they take those people out. One day, Shisheshin has a chance encounter with a very kind and warm-hearted human woman named Homily, and Homily mistakes Shisheshin for a human and ends up confessing that she is on the hunt for a shape-shifting monster who has cursed her family. Now, Shisheshin is very reluctant to lie to Homily. However, for the sake of self-preservation, they end up going along with her and joining her family on a hunt for herself. This book is so fucking charming. I cannot tell you how charming this book is. I never knew that I needed this in my life. It was so lovely and snarky and funny, and it was just like the perfect cure for everything that ailed me earlier this year when I read it. In fact, I am begging you guys, if you know anything else like this, please recommend it to me because I need more like this. This was a delight. This was an absolute delight. I loved it. I would read it 10 more times if I can. Would also recommend the audiobook because that's how I read it and it was wonderful. So now I have my top 3 books of the year. There was really no question about what my top 3 books were going to be, especially my number 1 book. I knew as soon as I finished it what that was going to be. And every time I finished one of these, I was like, new favorite book of the year? New favorite book of the year? So this was a very, very easy top 3 to pick. So my number 3 book of 2025 was Play Nice by Rachel Harrison. I'm just going to go ahead and shout out into the void right now. I would like more influencer horror because this was so much fun. I love this so much. And I love Rachel Harrison. She's one of my absolute favorite authors. This is my new favorite book by her, and this was so good. So in this book, we follow Cleo, and Cleo seems to have it all. She is a fashion influencer in New York City. She's got a string of attractive men who follow her around. She's getting invited to all these launch parties. She's doing content. She's getting paid. She's having a great time. But Cleo has a bit of a secret. When she was a child, she and her 2 sisters lived with their mother, Alex, and Alex was absolutely convinced that their house was possessed, and she began to spiral more and more into this idea, and it became a terrible abusive home. Her father had to rescue them, get custody of the kids. It was terrible. Now, at the beginning of this book, Alex, their mother, has passed away, and these sisters are trying to decide what they're going to do with this house. Her other two sisters are like, sell it, get rid of it. It's like an infamous house. Her mother wrote a book, like, we don't want it. We don't want to deal with this. We don't want to deal with the trauma. And Cleo was like, house flipping content is so popular right now. I am going to flip this house on my own, create the content, sell it, make a ton of money. What could possibly go wrong? One of the things that I love so much about Rachel Harrison's books is that she takes a lot of things that are considered very, very girly, very normal, very like generally considered like women issues, and she turns them into incredible horror books. And I love the way that she took on influencers, influencer lifestyle, and sort of like the obsession with content creation in this book. I also happen to love a haunted house book. It's my favorite sort of subgenre of horror, and she did a fantastic job with this, because not only is it incredibly funny and it's got a lot of heartfelt moments in it that we'll talk about in a second, but this book is really quite frightening. There's a lot of really, really properly scary moments in this book, and I just absolutely loved it. I just ate it up. This is a great horror book. But also, as I said earlier, I love books that have to do with sisters and sisterhood, and I think she did an absolutely wonderful job with the three sisters. Even though we focus mostly on Cleo, the other two have their own fleshed out characters, they have their complexities, and I love the relationship between the three of them. This is a fantastic book. I cannot recommend Rachel Harrison more highly, and this is my favorite of her books so far. This is going to be really, really hard to beat, but her one that's coming out next year I think is going to be pretty fabulous too. I did promise earlier that we had another T. Kingfisher book on this list, and my number 2 book of the year was Snake Eater. If you've not read any T. Kingfisher before, I think this is a fantastic place to start, because it is a fantasy book, but it has a lot of horror elements, and I feel like it shows off the best of both worlds for her. In this book, we follow Selena, who's fleeing a bad long-term relationship in the city, and she ends up going to the only place that she can possibly think of, and that is her aunt's house in a town called Quartz Creek, somewhere in the southwest of America. She and her dog Copper stumble into town with no money, barely anything to their name, and she finds out that her aunt has actually passed away. She doesn't really know what to do with herself, so she decides she is going to stay in her aunt's house temporarily until she can get her feet under her. And Selena loves the strange beauty of the desert. However, she begins to realize that there's something strange living out there. This is another one where I don't necessarily want to say a huge amount about it, because a lot of the delight for me was seeing the story unfolding and just not knowing what was going to happen next. Again, like all of T. Kingfisher's books, this has a fantastic older heroine. It has a very good dog. The dog is okay, don't you worry. It has wonderful world building. I loved seeing a fantasy set in the desert, and it has just incredible, incredible side characters. This book shows off a lot of her strengths as a writer. She is incredibly funny. She can write some really, really scary, haunting scenes, and she's just a wonderful storyteller. Out of all of the books that I read of hers last year, this was easily my favorite, and this is my new favorite book by her, which is saying a lot. And my number 1 book of 2025 is not a huge surprise, because I think it's a lot of people's favorite book of 2025, and that is The Everlasting by Alex E. Harrow. Now, I'm a huge fan of Alex E. Harrow's anyway. I have loved most of her stuff that I have read, and I went into this expecting to like it, maybe even love it, but this really blew me away. Now, in this book, we follow a young man named Owen, who is a former soldier, kind of a failing scholar. He's a little bit of an outcast, and he is obsessed with his nation's kind of mythical figure, which is this woman named Una Everlasting. Now, Una Everlasting is the sort of champion, the knight of the queen that united the domain that they live in, and she's this incredible figure of legend, very like King Arthur-like. Now, to not give away too much, because this is another one of those books where I went into it knowing very little, and I think that that really benefited my reading experience. Owen and Una's stories end up becoming entangled over the course of time. This is a book that feels incredibly timely, and it also feels like it's a book that comes from a place of rage, much like Bat Eater. I am having a really, really difficult time putting into words why I love this book so much. And of course, a lot of it is the characters. She writes wonderful characters. If you read her books before, you probably know that she writes really, really wonderful characters. It's not just the world, because if you've read her books before, you know she's a really wonderful world builder. It's not just her writing, because if you've read her books before, you know she's a really wonderful writer. What makes this, I think, not just a good fantasy book, but something that is really resonating with a lot of people right now. As I said, you'll see this on a lot of people's like best books of 2025 lists, is I think that it is an answer to what a lot of people are feeling right now, and the dissatisfaction with the kind of rise of fascism and white supremacy, and how this book is really an answer to that. This book is really deep. It has a lot of anger, and it feels like a response to a lot of what the author is seeing right now, because she is an American woman. She's very outspoken about her political feelings and beliefs, and you can really, really feel that. This feels really genuine in a way. And she does all of that in like 300 pages, which is really impressive to me. I am yammering and not really making a point. All of that to say is that this book really, really hit me hard. This is one that I'm going to be thinking about for a long time, and it is a truly fantastic book. So those are my best books of 2025. If you are looking for some recommendations for horror books or for fantasy books or for just a thumping good read, I would highly recommend picking up any of those. I think you'll have a great time. And I would also love to hear if you have read any of these. Please gush with me in the comments. I would love to talk about them because I'm now like hyped up about all of these books again. And I have new stuff that I have to read. I can't just reread these. That is it for this time. I will talk to you soon.